Hello, people of the internet, and welcome. Today I'm going to introduce you to Notch and walk you through your first day with this incredible software. If you're new around here, my name is Sean Bose, and I am a concert visual designer, animator based here in Los Angeles, California. And I wanted to introduce you to a software that I've been using more and more lately in my day-to-day workflow. And that software is Notch. So this is going to be a day one from the basics overview of your first experiences in Notch. So feel free to skip ahead a little bit if you've already got started. Hopefully you can learn something today that will help you get started with this amazing software. So let's start from the top. What exactly is Notch? Basically, Notch is a software that allows you to create animation and video effects that play back in real time. Okay, so the very first step, of course, is we need to get Notch. So if you haven't done that already, let's go do that. We're going to go to Notch.1. And we're going to go up here to Products, Notch Builder. And we're going to scroll down a bit to their pricing section and check out a couple of these options. So the first option, which I recommend if you are just getting started, is the trial version. It's a free version. You just download it and you can use it right away. That's super helpful because all of these other versions require a physical USB dongle as the key. So you have to wait for that to come in the mail. But if you want to get started right now, go ahead, download this free trial. It has all of the features available to test and play with. The limitation is that you just can't save things or export things, which, kind of a bummer, but it's free and you can start learning and practicing right away. So I recommend starting there. After that, we have the learning license. This is just for learning, not for commercial work, and they keep you honest with that because the output is limited to 1280p and also watermarked, so you won't be able to export videos and pass them off as actual work that you're to a client. But for 99 pounds, which is a little over $100 US, you get a perpetual license that you can use to learn and practice with. A step up from that is the base license, which is 99 pounds per month, but this will allow you to use this commercially. And let's go down here and check out some of the actual features. So you can see here is no longer watermarked or resolution limited for video or 360 video. You can spout in and out if you want to use this with Resolume in a VJ set, things like that. And then the level up from that is the professional version of Builder, which allows you to export as media server blocks and for VR. But those are a bit more professional use cases. If you're just getting started, one of these first three are probably fine. And the way that I worked my way up through these was I did just start with the trial, really enjoyed it, ordered the learning license. So I was using the trial until my learning license came in, practiced using the learning license while using the software actually in a studio that I work with. So I was using their professional license, but going home and practicing on my learning license. And then recently started doing some of my own work in Notch, and so I purchased this base license, which is a great option just for individual artists if you're not part of a large production. Alright, so you could go ahead and download that trial or whichever version you'd like to use, and we'll get started. Alright, so now that you've got Notch installed, we're going to go ahead and open it up. When you open up Notch, you're going to see this startup dialog opens up. It's going to show you some recent files, and you can open blank projects or new projects, but it also has these tabs here for template files and some sample scenes. Now these are a great place to start checking out things and using as a reference of how these different objects work together. And the template files are a great starting place for a lot of different tasks. So if you know you're going to be creating a scene where you need particles to be emitted from a 3D mesh, you just start here and it will set up the basics of that scene for you. And you can save your own files here too. If you find yourself using similar setups over and over again, just save it to the templates folder and you're going to have a place to start. It'll save you some time. So just to get started taking a look around, let's open up any one of these files here just to take a look at the interface and see what is happening. Alright, let's open up Balls of Steel. I don't know why. So we've opened up this scene, and there are a few main parts to this interface here. Right here you're going to see the viewport. If we play, this is where you can see what's happening in your scene and what your scene looks like. Down below on the bottom here, this network here is the node graph. This is where all the nodes that make up your scene live and are connected together. And to the right here of the node graph, this is your node library. And this is where all your different types of nodes live, so that you can search for them, search for a cloner, and you can search for them and then drag them in to add them to your scene. Right up here to the left of the viewport is your properties panel, and you can see that changes depending on which one of these nodes is selected, and that'll just show you the properties and attributes of that particular node so that you can change some parameters that are relevant to that piece. And then all the way to the left here is your resources panel, and that's where you can drag and drop files in, or click the right mouse button, import. You can import any number of different objects, 3D objects and scenes, images, some interactive inputs like a connect, different particle caches and scripts, shaders, sounds, fonts, and video files and image sequences. This is where you're going to import any outside assets that you want to use in this scene, and you can create folders and things to organize those. There are some tabs over here on the side of the node graph that you can see. You can also tab over. Hidden behind is the timeline. So here you can see there are actually different layers that make up this scene, and right now we're looking at this one. You can switch over to another one and maybe there's slightly different things going on, different settings, different versions of this scene happening, and they can all exist within the same project, and you can switch between them. You can also switch between layers over here. So you have these tabs here, you just check them out, switch between those right here. Alright, so now that we've taken a look at the basic parts of the interface, let's go and start a fresh scene. So here's a file new, blank project. And you'll see when you open up a blank project, it gives you this layer settings dialog. So you can name this layer, you can set your start and end time, and then I usually like to check off these three boxes. So I'm going to check deferred rendering. Now that is just going to allow your viewport to be a little bit faster when you're moving around working. It's not going to render the full scene right away when you're moving around. It's going to let the image develop a little bit. It's just going to make moving around a little bit quicker. I like to check off anti-aliasing, give us a nice smooth lines and edges so you're not getting that kind of pixelated aliasing look. Then I also like to check off high dynamic range. This is going to make your image 16-bit color versus 8-bit color. It's just going to give you a little bit more color information to work with, a little more range in your values and colors, and it'll just help make things look a little bit more high-end, realistic. So we'll click OK, and this is our scene. The only thing in our scene right now is this root node, and this is like the center, the brain of your scene here, and it basically contains those settings that we just set. You can see deferred rendering, high dynamic range, anti-aliasing. It's going to talk about which camera we're using, and you can go in and set some other settings. Like we did not in that setting window check off ray tracing, but if we wanted to use the ray tracing engine, we can come in here and enable that, and change any of the defaults for this layer in this scene. So to get started, let's go over here and type in shape to get a shape 3D node. We're going to do what we do in any tutorial. We're going to just add a shape to the scene. Now you can see the bounding box, but there's nothing really there, and that's because all of your nodes, in order for them to show up in this viewport, need to be connected to the root. And an easy way to do that is to just hit Control R, and that connects the selected node to the root. You can see this line here, and now if we pan around, you can see it's kind of dark in there, but there's a sphere. We have ourselves a sphere in the scene, and I'm orbiting around the viewport by holding down the Alt key and moving my mouse around with left mouse button held down. And there are some other controls that we can use to move around the scene as well. If we hold Shift and Alt, this will allow us to move around the grid. We can go forward and backwards. Once again, Alt is going to orbit, and Control and Alt is a zoom. It's just going to zoom straight in. You can orbit around with Alt, and we can track our camera with Shift and Alt. And some of those controls actually work in other parts of the program too. So if you're in the node graph down here and you need to move around, you can click and drag to select things. You can hold Alt to pan around, and then you can hold Control and scroll wheel to zoom in and out. So this is Alt, this is Control, scroll wheel. And that'll help you if you're, once this mess of nodes gets a little bigger, you'll be able to see and move around and find the node that you need. So this scene's looking kind of shit right now. You can't see anything. Let's add a light. So we can grab a light, pull it in, and once again, nothing's really happening. So we need to click Command R, add that to our scene. Here we go. And if we drag this handle out, you can see we're starting to light up this sphere. And if you don't see this handle here, here's a couple other controls that might be important to you. If you press E, that's going to bring up these translation controls that allow you to move your objects in whatever direction. If you click R, it's going to give you some rotation controls. You can grab these axes and rotate our light. If you click T, T is for transform. We're going to scale the object. This doesn't really work with the light. Let's go over to the sphere. So you can see T, it'll allow me to grab one axis, scale this up. You can also grab these little boxes, which are a combination of two axes, and scale something along a plane. And then let's undo that a little bit. Get back to even scaling. If I want to scale this whole thing just evenly up, I just want a sphere to be larger and not all oblong, you can hit Y, and that'll bring up this gray version. You can just click and drag anywhere, and that will scale the whole thing up uniformly. Okay, so now that we're starting to put some objects in the scene, let's talk about a couple of ways that we can connect objects and nodes together. Let's also talk about a couple of the different types of nodes that there are. So let's take a look over here at the node library, and you can see that all of our nodes are organized into these categories. So we have a section here for all the different camera types. We have our clone system, where we have different types of cloners and the effectors that go with cloners. We have some deformers. These will deform geometry and different objects like that. We have our fields system and all of the effectors, deformers, emitters, and rendering nodes that go with fields. We have some generators where you can generate different gradients and patterns and different procedural, like tiles and noise patterns. Some different geometry objects here. Splines, lines, null objects, the shape 3D, which we saw. We have our lights here. All kinds of different lights. A few different material types here. You have our basic material, emissive material. You can bring in substance designer materials. Then we have our modifiers. These objects are going to use different operations to create values. You could pull one of those in there just to explain that a little more. So you can see this math modifier. You can choose different functions like a sine wave, and when you hit play, it's going to run through this sine wave here. It's going to run through this sine wave here, and that's going to modulate the value that comes out, and you can use that to drive different parameters. We'll get into that in a second. So we have some other nodes here, various different nodes. These are, we've got, you know, like a 2D image or a color ramp or a solid color. We have our particle system objects here with all the effectors, emitters, rendering nodes, color coded in there. We've got some physics if you want to get some dynamics going, rigid bodies and collider bodies so that your objects interact in physical space. There's a whole menu here of post effects which you can add on top to affect your final output. You can see there's, you know, some color correction objects here, and there's some more crazy ones like can pixelate things, create some different stylization effects. We have our procedural system here, some different objects for your ray tracing if you want to use ray trace lighting. You can use the JavaScript node to create some scripting to control different objects. Some different shaders. You can bring in sounds, capture sounds or play sound files. And then all your video related nodes. So yeah, we got a bunch of nodes here, and we'll take a deeper dive into some of these as we go, but I just want to take a look at how a couple of these can connect together and a couple of the different ways that you can connect nodes. So we've looked at bringing a couple of nodes in and connecting them to the root so that they show up. And that is an important piece. All nodes that are in the scene and affecting the scene need to be connected to the root somehow. They don't have to be connected directly. They can be connected through other objects. So a simple example of that, you can bring in a null object here. And a way to disconnect one of these connections, if you hold down Shift Control and mouse over, you'll see that it turns red instead of yellow. So when it's red and you click on it, that's just gonna delete that. So you can see now that we've disconnected that, the shape 3D node is no longer showing up in the viewport. But if we connect the root to the null and then connect the null down to the shape, you can see that it shows up again, and that's because there is a connection from this object through the null back to the root. So you can have these parent-child relationships, and as long as there is a path that flows back to the root, it's going to show up. It doesn't have to be directly to the object itself. You'll see at the bottom of this node there are these little ports down here. So let's take a look at this. Say there's this target node. Say we want this light to always look at this sphere. We could drag from here. You'll see that these will light up if they're usable, if they can accept this type of object. So we could pull in the target, we can pull the shape into the target node, and that'll connect it. Now you can see wherever this sphere is, the light is shining on it. If we disconnect that, you'll see that it behaves a little differently. We can pull the sphere out of the light. If we make that the target, the light's going to always look at that object. Depending on what object that you have here, there's going to be different ports. Like you can see down here, one of the ports that's open on this shape 3D is the material. So we could bring in a material, and let's just change the color so we can see that this is different. We can pull in the material, drag that in, and now this material is going to affect this shape. You can see on this material it has a bunch of different ports as well for all your different maps. So you can bring in, you can have some image nodes in here that get piped in to any of these. Another way to do that, there's actually a bunch of different parameters that can be controlled in the shape 3D, not just the material. So if we double click that node, it's going to expand it. And let's control zoom in a little bit so we can see there's all these different parameters that are revealed, and these little boxes here are actually ports that mean that you can pipe other information in to drive that particular attribute. So that's pretty cool. Let's take this math modifier and let's just bring that into, let's pipe that into position Z and see what happens. So we'll pipe it in, and you can see that it's connected. If we hit play, you can see that this sine wave is modulating this value up here, which is then being piped in to position Z, and you can see it's turned yellow because that means there's a modifier connected to it. And you can see this value is going up and down and up and down, and that's affecting our object here. So that's pretty cool, but this is kind of a, like, this text is really small and it's kind of a long list of stuff, and you gotta, unfold this object and fold it back up. It's kind of a messy way to work. So let's disconnect that. One cool thing is that once you connect it to a parameter, it's going to stay out there, so that if you want to bring another, if you want to disconnect that, bring another modifier in here and connect it to the same parameter, it's already out there for you. It knows you might want to use it again. But another way to connect modifiers and things to parameters is actually just to select the object that you want to affect, and you can just drag from here up into the attribute manager, hover your mouse over the parameter that you want to affect, and just let go. And you can see that this turned yellow, and is being affected by this modifier. And you can see that it formed that connection within the node graph. Now it's a little clunky. It doesn't look like your little connection here kind of glitches out and whatever, but it is keeping track, and you can connect it to whatever parameter that you want. And the cool thing about a node-based workflow here is that we can connect this same modifier to multiple parameters. So we can connect it to position Z and the scale, maybe scale Y as well, maybe all of them. Woo. So shiny spheres are cool and all, but let's see what happens when we bring in some outside objects. So let's go right click, import resource 3D. Let's bring in a 3D object. So I've got this folder here, and I'm going to go in this skeleton collection. I have a few OBJs prepared, and let's just bring in this skull object, open that up, and just hit OK. You can see we've got this skull object in here in our resources panel now. So we can just drag that in, and it's going to create a 3D object node for us. If we press Control R, it's going to come in our scene. Now it's a little big, so we'll press Y, scale that sucker down, rotate him around. Look at that. We got a nice little skull guy in there. Pretty cool. And if we wanted, we could use this same material. You can see this node lit up. This is our material port, and we can use the same material here. And I do recommend using material nodes versus the alternative. Let's take a look. If we bring in another shape 3D, you can see that it has somewhat of a material on its own. And if we scroll down in the properties panel here, you can see there's this material section. And in this material section, we have all the same kind of controls. We can make it red. We can change the specular, the emissiveness. We can make it more metallic or not. Roughness of the reflection. And that's all fine and good. But if we bring in another shape 3D, we want it to look the same, well, now we have to go in, change the color, we have to do it all over again. But as you saw earlier, it's really nice that we can connect, we can make this one red material, connect it to multiple objects. And now if the client decides that actually we like everything to be blue, you can just move one setting over to blue, everything's blue. You can make everything a little more shiny, a little roughness. And you can make these changes once and not have to rebuild. And that's going to get really important when you're connecting color textures and normal maps and roughness maps and all these different maps, building these complex materials and wanting to apply them to another object. So we can just double click and that'll open up an Explorer window here, and let's go to resources. Let's bring in one of these HDRIs. Okay. Let's go back. Let's go to our materials. Got some everyday material collection free samples. So let's bring in maybe this marble. Just bring all these in. Cool. So let's take a look. Let's bring in another shape as well, another 3D object. 3D object. Let's go back to our skeleton. We'll bring in the spine. Okay. Cool. So, some other things we can do. Let's copy and paste some nodes. So we can select Control C, and when you press Control V, wherever your mouse is, that's where it's going to place the object. A lot of people don't know this, and press delete, not backspace, delete, and I'll just select Control V and it's right there, and you gotta move it. Just know that wherever your mouse is, that's where it's gonna put it. So you can just move your mouse over to where you want it and it'll be right there. So we've got this other 3D object, and it's going to be the skull again. But what we can do, there's actually an object pull down here. So we can just pick a different object. And now we have our spine in there. And that's a good way, like all of these objects came from the same scene. So they're all a similar scale. So remember when we brought the skull in, it was a bit large and we scaled it down. If you don't want to have to do that again, you can just use the same 3D object node. So it'll come in at the same scale. You can just change the object. It'll be relatively the same size, which is nice. Let's go over here and bring in another material. Let's look at how we can use some of these maps. So let's make this not blue. We're going to make this skull and the spine out of marble. So we've got our material selected. We're going to scroll down until we see these texture maps here. We can just drop down and choose some of these images. So we can choose the diffuse color for the color map. Choose the normal for the normal map. Roughness for the roughness map. If we zoom in, you can see that we kind of have this marble texture here. And you know, it's not bad. Let's change some settings in our light. Let's make this a physical light. Crank up the brightness. But you might notice, like, I'm dragging this sucker and it's just stopping at 1. How can I want more. I want more. Well, I could type it in. What you can also do is hold Alt, and that'll let you drag beyond the boundaries of any of these sliders. So we can brighten this up a bit. Now another thing I might want to do is bring in that HDRI to get some reflections going. So let's go back to our lighting and explore. You can see we can bring in an environment map. It sounds like it might be what we want. So we'll drag it in, Command R, and link up our HDRI with our environment map image here. Nothing really seemed to be happening, but that's because you have to enable environment maps in your material. So we selected that. We're gonna scroll down to the settings. You can see here environment mapping is not checked. If we check that, boom, we've got some reflections happening here. You can see it's not happening on the sphere. That's because this material, we need to enable that. But now we have some reflections. You can see, this is pretty fast. This is just running. We got reflections, we got lighting, and it's just chilling. Not bad. Another piece that I want to look at are these here. These are your different views. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All your number keys are going to control the different views and cameras inside of your scene. Alright, let's go with 1. 1, this is a sort of a 3/4 perspective view. 2, we have our side view. 3 is a front view. 4 is a top view. 5, this is our default orbit view, so we can kind of orbit around. This is probably the view that you're going to use the most until you have a camera. So let's bring a camera in and let's connect it, and you can see the view didn't change, but our camera is in here. So if you pull that back a little bit, let's press 6. That's going to go to your first camera in the scene. So you can see if we toggle between 5 and 6, we're in number 5 now. This is where our camera is, looking right at the nose and the teeth of this skull. If we press 6, you can see we're all up in there. So let's just pull ourselves back a little bit. You can see now this is our camera view number 6. You can check that up here. It's called Scene Camera 1, 6. So that we could change, we could change all these parameters from within the camera to line up our view. Say we like that. That's a cool angle. And there are other type of cameras too that are quite useful. One that I use a lot is the orbit camera. In this camera, we're going to pull in. You can see nothing changed. This is now going to be 7. Yes, 7. This is now going to be 7. You can see if we change a parameter in there that we are looking through this camera. And the reason for that is that this one is underneath, so it's the second camera. If we bring it to the top, you're going to see that it switches. It's not actually linked to the specific node or the order that you added it to the scene. It's actually, the node graph is red top to bottom, so this is the second camera in the node graph. But why I like the orbit camera is it's essentially as though there's a null in the middle of the scene and your camera is pre-parented to that. So this distance is actually the distance that it's pulled back from the center. So if we go to 0, we're like all up inside our spine and we can pull back a little bit. But then if you mess with the rotation settings here, you can see that it's rotating around the center point. Versus if we go to this camera, we're rotating, the camera itself is rotating around its own central axis. So this is like you're rotating your head, whereas if we go back to the orbit camera, you have to select. If we go back to our orbit camera, we're actually rotating around the center point, which is in front of us, and we're pulled back from that. So that's it for the basics of how to get started using Notch. I hope this helped you to understand how to get Notch, the basics of the interface, and the basics of pulling in assets, pulling in nodes, and how to start connecting them to build a scene. Now, I recommend you just do some exploring, play around, and see what happens when you connect a couple of nodes. And we'll be back in the future with some more detailed tutorials that break down all the different elements that you can put together to build some more complex scenes. So if you like this video, please leave a like, leave a comment, or subscribe so you can find out when we have more Notch tutorials ready for you. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.